Hey guys, this video is about growing hydrangeas from seed, and it's a multi-step process. I'm going to go through as many as I can, probably 25 to 30 steps along the way, and tell you everything I know about starting hydrangea from seeds. So if you're not collecting the hydrangea seeds yourself from your own plants in your yard or a friend's yard or something like that, you'll want to make sure that you get your seeds from a reputable dealer. They have a limited shelf life, about 1 year. After that, the viability rate drops drastically. Now you want to store your seeds in a cool, dry place, preferably in a envelope made out of paper or I'm trying to think what else you could put them in, but don't put them in plastic, because if you're storing them for a long time and if there's any moisture in the seeds, that could cause a mold problem. Now, if you can inspect the seeds before you purchase them and you see mold in it, you want to bypass those seeds because the viability is probably going to be really low. Now, your two best times of year for planting these seeds is either early spring or early fall. Your container choice is going to be a small domed container that will maximize humidity, and ideally, if you can get one that has individual cells, that will be even better. Now, you'll want to go with a sterile seed starting mix to put in your cell tray. And that's really important to think about, because you want the seeds to have the best chance possible to getting along their way to propagation. So let's head into the potting shed and we'll go through step by step on putting your seeds into their tray and all the tips and tricks I can tell you about the soil and the important way that it needs to be prepared. Now, the first thing I'm going to talk about is your soil. You want to pre-moisten the soil before you put it into your seed tray. You want it to have the consistency of a wrung out sponge, wet but not soaking wet. You can squeeze it and it holds together. I'm going to show you that right now. I'm going to bring you in a little bit closer so you can see this process step by step. All right, we're going to use our sterile seed starting mix, and I'm going to put that in our mixing tray, and I'm going to try not to stir up too much dust. We're going to add some water. We're going to add the water sparingly because we want to get a feel for how wet the soil is. So I'm going to mix it by hand. And I'm hoping I didn't add too much water there, but I just want it to have a wet feel of a sponge. I'm just going to mix that thoroughly. Just keep mixing. I think we need a little bit more water. I think we're getting close. It's really hydrophobic, but we're going to mix it until it absorbs that water. See, and it's starting to clump together, but we still want to mix it thoroughly, because the soil, if we just go and put our seeds in the tray and we don't do this step, the soil itself may not be wet. It may be wet on the surface, but down beneath it may be a little dry. So just remember, pre-moistening the soil is really important. I think we've got it. It's going to hold together nicely. It feels exactly like a wet sponge. Now the next step is going to be filling our seed starting tray with the soil. So I'm going to move that out of the way. I'm going to bring in our tray. It's just I believe it's made by Jiffy. I'll link it down below. But the reason I like this one so much, it does have this top that can open. It can allow some of the humidity to escape. So that's a really great thing. If you have too much humidity, which is probably unlikely when you're starting seeds, but we're going to put this seed starting soil mix into the tray. Now there's a secondary tray here, and then there's the main tray down below. There's holes in this tray to allow moisture to escape if there's too much water. So I'm just going to carefully, I'm going to move this out of the way so you can see exactly what I'm doing. And I'm hoping the camera's picking that up. We're just going to bring our seed starting mix in here. I'm just going to spread it across the cells until it's even. And then I'm going to lightly press down on each one of them. So I'll have about 1/4 of an inch to 3/4 at the top. And that will give us room to top this with just a little bit of peat moss to add a little bit of extra acidity. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to fill each one of these seed trays, and then we're going to slightly tamp them down. I'll show you what I do that with as well. Okay, we've got our soil in our seed tray, and we're ready to go there. A little bit in each cell. I may have not made it perfect, but I'm going to use my irrigation screwdriver. I'm just going to tamp down lightly in each cell to make sure there's just a little bit of firmness to the soil. It's going to take a second to do that. I'll try to speed through this process. But we want the seeds to be buried about 1/4 of an inch. So that's what we're doing here. We're just pressing down the soil so they can have 1/4 of an inch covering. We've almost got it done there. I'm just trying to not miss any there. And the soil is not super compacted, but we're going to top this with some peat moss and allow for a little bit of extra acidity in the soil. Now, as I said earlier, this tray has a dome that will help humidity, and the dome is also able to open and close. And since it's going to be in my refrigerator for a few weeks, this will remain closed to maximize humidity. One thing that's super critical to do is to date and put what's in there, because if you do as many seeds and cuttings and things like as I do, it's so much easier when you know what's in there, because you'll forget if you're doing hundreds of seeds like I do. So anyways, make sure you label. That'll help you out quite a bit. Okay, so once we put the seeds in here and we take it inside the house, it's probably going to remain in my small refrigerator for about 2 months, because I'm in no hurry, but I want to get them in the germination phase once I'm getting close to my last frost state so I can get them outside. So just remember, it's going to take 1 to 2 months inside of a refrigerator, but I'm going to not be worried about it because I'm not in a hurry. This is the end of September, and so if I was doing this in the spring, I may be a little bit more anxious to get the process started. But I've got plenty of time throughout the winter, and this will be an early spring project once my last frost date has occurred. Now, once we're past that couple of month period in the refrigerator, or if it's early spring, maybe a month, you're going to take them out of your fridge and put them into an unheated basement or garage. And you want to use, if it's really cold in there, you'll want to use a seed starting heat mat. And so you can do this inside, it's not a big deal, but I just like having that little bit of cooler temperature because you're coming out of the fridge and now you're going into an area that's not heated or cooled. So you can do it, it's up to you, you can choose either way, but I like just take them out to my garage and have them out there for the next period of time. Now the ideal temperature is going to be between 70 and 80 degrees. That's the optimum temperature, and that's the purpose of the heat mat. Okay, so we're going to sow our seeds into our tray, and I'm just going to carefully, and I'll let you see what the seeds look like up close. You can see a pretty good amount of seeds there. There's some debris mixed in with it, but it would take days to separate it, so it's just better to just do a little bit of cheating there and allow a little bit of debris to go with it. So we're just going to sprinkle these as we go, and we're just trusting that we're dropping a few seeds in each cell. And if it's too many, we can go back and thin them out in the springtime. And I'm probably going to use more than one seed tray here, but I'm just doing this for the video. So I'm just going to put some in each one, make sure we're getting some there. And of course, thinning is going to really be important once these start germinating. And so there we go. We've got lots of seeds in our seed starting tray. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add peat moss to help with the acidity and cover the seeds themselves. Now we're going to use our small bucket of peat moss, and we're just going to lightly cover each seed with about 1/4 of an inch of peat moss. And so that is a really good thing for hydrangeas because they do like it a little on the acidic side. So I'm just going to make quite a mess here, but I'm going to cover each seed. And once we go over the tray, we're just going to scrape it across so it'll be level. But I'm going to try to make sure every seed is generously covered. And once we use our scraping device, we'll have a nice level amount of peat moss. And so that way everybody will have roughly about 1/4 of an inch covering them. And there you have it. I've made a giant mess as usual, but every seed is protected with just a little bit of peat moss on top. All right, I'm just going to scrape this carefully across so we get a nice even coat of the peat moss and try not to remove too much. There you have it, and we can see each individual cell. And just make sure there's no large pieces of debris. Sometimes peat moss will have pieces of wood in it, something like that. And so there you go. I'm just using the lid of a plastic container to make sure we've got a nice even seed bed. Now before I cover our seeds, I want to spray them one final time with our misting bottle and just make sure they've got plenty of moisture in them. I'm hoping this is not drowning me out here. Got such a sensitive mic. Okay, that's got a pretty good misting. So we're ready to add our humidity dome. And one thing I will say, these humidity domes will come off pretty easy. So I would recommend taking some painter's tape and sealing it. There's another type of tape I'm always recommending made by 3M. It's an electrician's tape. It looks exactly like duct tape, but it's not. It's actually a electrician's tape, and it works really well. And when you put this into your fridge, it's a good idea to seal it with tape because it can often get knocked around in the refrigerator And if you have an accident, you're going to have a really big mess with seeds and dirt in your refrigerator. So guys, we've got our security tape on the seed tray. And that way we don't have to worry quite so much about this top coming off or something happening while it's in the refrigerator for the next 1 to 2 months. So that is a simple way. And I put a shorter piece of tape on the front so I can peel it back. I can check on the seedlings from time to time and see what's happening, see if it's too dry. Make sure if you get this type, make sure you're closed off and you have maximum humidity in there, because it needs to stay humid in this environment to make sure those seeds propagate. Now, once your hydrangea seeds come out of the fridge, you want to put them in a windowsill or somewhere they can get indirect light. Make sure it's not direct light. Even if you remove the humidity dome, I still wouldn't have it in direct light. Absolutely not with a humidity dome on it, because this thing will heat up like a mini oven. Now you'll want to check them about once or twice a week and make sure the soil is moist but not soggy. So you may come back and do some more light misting over the period where they're just in that germination phase and they're starting to send out their leaves. And so just make sure the soil does not dry out, but you don't want it soggy either. Once you remove them from the fridge, you can expect to see germination results in about 2 to 4 weeks. So that's why it's a great thing to do over the winter. You start coming into that spring season and you'll already have some hydrangea ready to go into their new pots. Now, when the seeds have sent out their first true set of true leaves, you're going to thin them to 1 plant per cell. You want to make sure that they're not crowded, and if you've got multiple ones in there, it's going to be a problem. So make sure you thin it to 1 per cell. Now, once they've started to show their new true leaves, you want to use very weak fertilizer. Use this at half its strength. Bloom Booster is very good for creating roots. It's got the high NPK number, P being phosphorus, and that's for root formation. So a standard fertilizer with higher nitrogen might be okay, but you really want it to establish roots. So I always recommend the Bloom Booster. I'll link that as well below. Now, as you monitor them through the growing phases, you want to look for any type of pest that might be on there. You can use a very weak solution of neem oil, and that will help you quite a bit because it's an all-natural pesticide. I always recommend this one that's 100% neem oil. It's around here somewhere. But anyways, make sure you use neem oil and not anything too strong, and don't mix the neem oil too strong. So just a light spray of neem oil would get rid of any pest. If you have any diseases, that's something else you need to take care of. Make sure there's no mold or anything like that. That could be a problem, especially if you've got too much humidity and too much moisture. Now, if you do see a problem with molds, you might try 1 teaspoon of hydrogen peroxide per gallon. Put it into your mister and just do a light misting over the top of them, and that should knock down any diseases that pop up. Now, once your seedlings are starting to get really healthy and grow, you may have to remove the top to allow them more room. Hardening off is the next step. You're going to take them outside and put them out, not in direct sunlight, shaded area, and let them stay out there for about 1 hour a day for about a week, and allow them to harden off and get used to the differences in temperatures. Of course, this is going to be well past your last frost date. Make sure you don't do this when there's a chance of frost or anything, even during the day, but especially not overnight. Give them about 1 hour during the daytime shade. Now, you may decide to leave your hydrangeas in a pot, and that's perfectly fine. But if you do decide to put them in the ground, you're going to want to make sure that it is a well-draining area, partial sun. You don't want it full sun. That's why I recommend having them in a pot for a while, allowing them to establish themselves here and maybe go from this size up to a gallon size. Once you've reached gallon size, then you can put them maybe in a more sunny area. But just be careful, because you don't want them going into a full sun area when they're still very small, unless you have a lot of time to monitor and water. Now, once you're ready to put your seedling into the ground, you want to make sure you do a soil test. The soil here where I live in zone 7A is very high clay content. So you want to add a lot of compost to that hole. Dig the hole 2 to 3 times the size of the root ball. Something like this, I would even say maybe even 4 times, because it's going to grow pretty quickly. So just make sure you do that. Also, you want to make sure your pH is correct. Hydrangeas prefer a more acidic soil, roughly about a 5.5 to 6.5. So if you do a pH test, and I can put a link to this as well, but your pH should be at that range. If it's not, you can add a little bit. If it's too alkaline, you can add a little bit of peat moss to bring down the pH, and just keep testing it over a period of a couple of weeks. Now, when you put these out in the open ground, and if they're this size or gallon size, you think, wow, these plants are small, I'm going to put them close together. That's really not a good idea. You want anywhere from 3 to 5 feet, and I would recommend a little bit closer to the 5-foot point, because if you remember the hydrangea at the beginning of the video, the hope leaf hydrangea gets really large. So that's one thing I would recommend, probably 5 feet apart, because they look so beautiful when you have an entire area of them In the early spring, early summer, you have huge amounts of flowers on them. It's really a great process to see that happen. But just remember, 3 to 5 feet, but I'd say closer to 5. Now about planting depth, you're going to want the top of this pot, or whatever size pot, if it's gallon, if you let it go to 3 gallon, that shows a lot of restraint and a lot of patience. But whatever size pot, you want the top of this pot to be level with the soil. You'll want to water as soon as you get it into the ground thoroughly to allow the soil to really absorb a lot of water, because the surrounding soils can absorb a lot of water and take a lot of water away from your plant. Also, put 2 to 3 inches of mulch on top of it to retain that moisture, because if it doesn't rain and you forget to water, that can kill that seedling that you put so much work into. Now, the first year your seedling is in the ground, you want to make sure that you keep it evenly moist on the soil, because that is critical that first year for the plant to establish its roots. You're going to fertilize it during the growing months, about once a month or every 3 weeks. And I always recommend the bloom booster because you're wanting it to establish those roots. Nitrogen is important, and this has nitrogen in it, but the P, the phosphorus in the NPK in this is really high. I think it's like a 54. I'll have to read you the exact amount, but it's much, much higher than the nitrogen. And for me, I want to see root formation so the plant can grow faster and become much healthier. This is the great stuff. So at the end of the first growing season, you're approaching winter. Now, my winters are not that bad. Zone 7A, yeah, we get some cold days, but they're not brutally cold. But if you're in a much lower zone, further north, you may want to consider protecting the young seedling. If it's only a foot tall, foot and a half, 2 feet, cover it up and make sure that it doesn't freeze completely. Just give it some type of winter protection. Here, that's not even necessary because our summers are very hot, winters are on the mild side, and they can survive through the winters. That's what I was saying at the beginning of the video. We consider these wild hydrangeas here because they grow in the forest. Now, fertilizing the second year, I recommend you can kind of slack off of the liquid fertilizer if you want to, but you want to get a slow release fertilizer. This Osmocote is great. It fertilizes up to 6 months. So that second year, you can use a slow release fertilizer. Just put a handful at the base of the plant, and that will keep it fertilized for the entire growing season. And you can hit it some more with the bloom booster, but if you just want to cut back on fertilization and save yourself some time, try a slow release fertilizer. So the first few years of growth, I'm going to recommend, for me, this is how I do it. I don't do a lot of pruning on oak leaf anyways, but if you do have to do pruning, only prune dead or damaged limbs. Oak leaf hydrangea really doesn't need pruning where I live, but I like to keep it shaped, and I don't want it to get too tall. So I want it to prune it back a little bit at the end of the growing season. And that also helps with the leaf formation. You'll see it a little bit thicker than you would in the wild. If you see one in the wild, it's kind of a leggy plant where I live. So that's something you can consider on the oak leaf variety. Now, if you're having a problem with insects attacking the plant when it's in its youth, try some neem oil. Just put it in your mist sprayer and mist it couple times, and I think you'll see a drastic reduction. If you have some diatomaceous earth, you could put it in a donut formation around the base of the plant, and that will also help with ants or other insects. But where I live, the oak leaf hydrangea is really, really strong plant, and some places it grows completely wild and nobody ever assisted in its growth. So it's amazing to see those growing in the forest and very healthy. Now, if you're wondering why you're not seeing flowers the first year, it's usually not normal for that to happen. It's usually your second year you're going to see flowers starting to bloom on the hydrangea. So just remember that. There's nothing wrong. It's just going through its natural process, and you'll see flowers the second year it's been in the ground. Now, if you can do this early enough and this flower starts to fade, you can remove the flower, deadhead the hydrangea, and you might get a second set of flowers early if you do that early enough. Now, this isn't applicable to oak leaf hydrangeas, but you know, the mop head or the lace caps, I think it's the mop heads, will change color with acidity in the soil. So you can buy some additives to add to your soil and change the color from pink to blues or blues to pinks. So that's something to remember, is that you can do that with the big mop top or mop head hydrangeas. Now, the best time to take cuttings for propagation, if you want to do that, is in summer, usually around July. You can take that from a lot of the different hydrangea varieties, and hydrangeas do form from cuttings very easily. Even though I like starting from seed, you can also do the same thing with cuttings. Now, once it becomes about 5 years old, and if it's not looking that great, you can do a really hard cutback, and that will really help boost the growth and vigor of the plant. I know we've done that before on oak leaves, and the following year or that year, they did so great. They just came out and were doing quite well. So if the plant has gotten over 5 years old and it's not quite what it used to be, cut it back severely, maybe 50%, and you'll see some amazing results from that. So again, with hydrangeas, you'll want to test the soil once every couple of years to make sure that you don't need to put in any additives to change the pH. They do like it on the acidic side, so just remember, if they're not performing like you think they should, it could be that issue right there that you need to add some peat moss to lower the acidity and help them retain their vigor. So guys, I hope that helps you understand the process of planting hydrangea from seeds. And if you go back and watch the previous video, I'll link that as well about how to collect the seeds. That's very important too. Or if you're purchasing the seeds, just go through the steps and make sure you're getting a quality seed. So anyways, thanks for watching. I really appreciate every view, every comment, and everyone who's subscribed. Have a great day.